So when you think about the amount of time we spend at work, on average, people in the United States spend 90,000 hours at work. Mm-hmm. And so if those relationships are messed up, your whole life is bad.
Hi, y'all. You're listening to Optimal Instinct with Trish, and I am Trish Tagley,
a business efficiency expert who uses a one-day summit to get your clients to stay longer, pay more, and refer often. Today's guest is Liz Wiltsie, who has mentored over 175 millennials and is on a mission to make workplace relationships better using the Centendry method. She brings a myriad of experience from film to tech to education to enrich her work. So let's welcome Liz. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Trish. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so great. Thank you for being on the show. Thank you for taking the time. Let's jump right in. What is the problem that you solve?
So the problem that I solve is around workplace relationships. So when you think about the amount of time we spend at work, on average, people in the United States spend 90,000 hours at work. Mm-hmm. And so if those relationships are messed up, your whole life is bad. And the thing that I really work on is there's a subset of people who are in leadership roles who got there because they were good at something, not necessarily because they're great at managing people, but because it's like, okay, well, I can manage a project, or I can code, or I can, make a movie, and you end up leading a team of people, but you're missing some of those skills to really, the three things that I tend to focus on are being respected without fear, motivating your team without manipulation, and then building kick-ass morale without false praise, or as my mom would say, blowing sunshine up somebody's behind, right? So, and so those are kind of the three things that I focus on.
So basically what you do is you take the Peter principle, and then which says that you get promoted to the point of incompetence, and then you take them from incompetent to competent. Not to say that, people might be just lacking or weak in a certain skill, and that's where you train them on. But basically that's what you do, is you take that principle and you move people forward from there.
Indeed. Yep.
Yeah. So that's great. And I'm so glad that you know what the Peter principle is. Because
I do.
So many people do not. Okay. So what do you think is a common mistake that people make when they try to solve the problem that you do solve?
So one of the kind of key mistakes that people make are, once you get into a leadership position, there's often hesitance to be accountable for anything. Mm-hmm. So as humans, we don't often like to admit when we're wrong about something. And it feels like as people move up in the ranks of leadership, that feels like there's higher and higher stakes. Mm-hmm. And that's actually almost exactly opposite of the way to build a really great team, which is, if you're at the top of that food chain, if you can admit that you are wrong about something, then your team respects you in a much bigger way, and also realizes that, oh, I can make a mistake and the world will not end, right? So I think that kind of accountability piece is one of the biggest mistakes that people make.
It's something that I speak of, when I talk to other business leaders. It's the ability to say, I don't know. And I think that's lacking, because people who start to get promoted, they're like, well, I should know this. So, or people can't know I don't know this, so I'm just going to pretend to know. But that is so wrong, because allowing yourself to say, I don't know, means you're opening yourself up to learn not only about whatever it is that you don't know, but the person who's going to help you. And it just, again, it's the communication, it's the relationship. And you said it builds more respect for you, because you're allowing yourself to be seen as human, right? Mm-hmm. So, okay. So based on what you said earlier, what is a tip that you can give a leader or somebody in that position?
There's two pieces. One is, when you make a mistake, own it. Mm-hmm. Own it fast, own it publicly. Essentially, the bigger your title, the more public you need to be when you mess something up. And not in a like, oh my God, I'm so horrible. Just yep, I messed this up. Here's the steps I'm taking to remedy that. So that's one piece. And I have seen it make a difference overnight in people, in their teams, because it starts to change the culture immediately. So that's one piece. The other is to never think that someone doesn't have a valid opinion to share, because we get, I mean, you know this, you are working on optimal thinking all of the time, right? Where things are changing.
Yeah.
The world is changing, technology is changing, business is changing, people are, evolving in different ways. And so the idea that the people at the top have the only valid opinions is going to keep you from really creative ideas, and is going to shut down particularly your younger kind of millennial Generation Z, which is my heart and soul is kind of there, right? And you're going to shut those folks down by saying, sorry, come to me in 10 years when you have an opinion that I want to hear, instead of finding a way to really bring some of that in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You remind me of what I used to do when I used to work in corporate. I would bring my team together and do peer-to-peer teaching, okay? Simply because, one, I wanted to understand what they were working on. So it was a learning experience for me, but it also allowed them to own the specific area that they were experts at and be a resource for the rest of the team. And it fostered relationships. As a leader, I allowed them to shine and say, hey, this person knows this thing, instead of it's always being me, me, me.
Optimal Instinct with Trish is brought to you by TrishTagley.com and the book Everyone Knows You Suck, Bad Boss Stories, A Succinct Guide, available now in both ebook and print format on Amazon.com. And the C's Value Model that supports your desire for client relationships that are more profitable, more productive, and more likely to refer. To understand more about the C's model, go to clientvaluedemo.com.
Is there a free resource that you would like to share?
Sure. So I have what I like to consider kind of a cheat sheet, right? Because again, I work with Millennials, Gen Z. So if it's longer than a page, we're not doing it, right? And that's not a diss. I think that we have more and more things that take our time, that the faster we can be, the better. So it's a one-page piece about accountability. So it's some of the behaviors that a leader could model. And then it also has a framework that I use for what I call a valid apology. If you've done something where you need to actually apologize to another human, there are certain ways where we've all had the kind of apology that feels a little bit more like to hell with you than an actual apology, right? And we've had the kind that you go, oh, I totally know that you're sincere and that we can move forward, right? And so to me, there's 5 keys in there. It outlines what that is. So it's kind of a page that you could keep on your desk and just go, okay, am I doing these things? Am I walking through these 5 pieces? And it makes it a little bit easier.
Okay, great. So we'll definitely share the link when we share the podcast in the blurb that we'll have for that. So, okay, for the last question, what should I have asked you that I didn't?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the question is, but there's a piece around when you're bringing other people into the conversation, and one of the mistakes that people make is hogging the credit, right? Like we've all been in that meeting where our boss goes, I had this idea, and you're like, we talked about that 2 days ago, right? And so it's one of those things where recognizing that as a leader, your strength is in the strength of your team.
Yeah.
And so to be able to go, hey, it was Trish who had that idea. Yeah. And I'm really glad we could work with it, rather than saying, hey, I did this thing, and being a kind of credit hog, because people are not here for it.
No, they're not. But let me dig into that question a little further, if you don't mind. Why do you think I couldn't do that, but why do you think people take credit for other people? I cannot even understand. There's no reason that comes
I think there's two things that I think of, right? One is a generous assumption and one is a less generous assumption. The most generous assumption I can make, which I'm sure happens, is that the bigger your team is or the bigger your company is or kind of the faster you're moving, the more you can't remember what you thought of and what somebody else thought of, and if you're in a like really collaborative environment. I said it was a generous assumption.
Yeah, you did.
And so like there's one that I can see that happening particularly in really collaborative environments, which then the person who had the idea and didn't get credit for it, I would say, go to your supervisor and say, hey, do you remember that I was the one that said that? Like you can start from a place that says, I'm sure you didn't mean it this way. And you give someone kind of a nice out to be like, oh yeah, you're right, totally. And then they think about it differently, right? So there's a generous piece.
Yes.
The other side is just straight up insecurity, right? Where people are going, where people are saying, you know, my job is on the line. Everyone is, there's often a like false scarcity piece that says that if I'm not seen as the superstar, I might lose my job. I might not be promoted, right? And I think that also starts at the top to be able to say, hey, we value people who are cultivating their team, not necessarily the people who are Lone Ranger superstars. And like you and I both have some pretty significant experience in a tech realm where that sort of Lone Ranger cowboy superstar thing is, I mean, like they make movies about that, right? So you've got this thing that's sort of this pop culture idea that isn't really about cultivating a team, that's about being that superstar. And I think there's a disconnect in real life between that. So that's also a little bit generous. Also.
It is still a little generous, but you're true. I guess it does, you know, that kind of behavior does stem from insecurity. And when I was in corporate, I never really thought of, oh, well, I might lose my job if I don't have a good idea. I never really worried too much about losing my job. I mean, don't get me wrong. I had been laid off a couple of times, but yeah, you're right. I guess that's what it is. Like you said, it's still a little generous, but yeah, insecurity. So any other last words?
I just think in that piece, I try to work with folks to get over the anxiety of having difficult conversations or like to find ways to work through it. Cause I think you're always a little bit anxious no matter what you do.
Oh yeah.
And so to be able to recognize that like sometimes people don't realize they're doing stuff. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they're being malicious, but lots of times they're actually just
oblivious.
I didn't realize. I'm oblivious. I didn't know. Right. And so like, what does that look like to both hold people accountable in a way that feels non-threatening and to be willing to be held accountable? So like as a leader to be able to go, yeah, if I messed something up, please come tell me. And you can prove to the people who work for you that you're open to that by being open to it. Because if they come to you and say, hey, this thing sort of went in a way that I was not super excited about, and you're like, to hell with you, go away, right? That person will never come back to you. They will never come back. So there's a real commitment on the leadership side to say, to be open.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of my philosophy on leadership is something that you've talked about, and we're on the same page, and that's why I'm talking to you. But all right, Liz, I won't keep you much longer. Thank you so much for your time. Okay, thanks. Take care.
Thank you very much for joining us on Optimal Instinct with Trish. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, head on over to iTunes, subscribe, and if you really enjoy the content, leave us a well-appreciated review. If you are looking to create an environment that partners your desire for more profitable, more productive, and greater referability in client relationships, combined with sustained team morale, then I suggest you head over to clientvaluedemo.com to learn more about the C's value model. Talk soon.